Blog Talk Radio. Hello and welcome to Subversive Radio. I'm your host, Keith Giles, and we have a very special podcast this evening. My very big friend and brother in Christ, Herb Montgomery. He is the founder of Renewed Heart Ministries. He's just really a great guy, and I'm very honored to have him on the program with me this evening. And if you would like to call in and talk to Herb or myself, you may do so by calling 646-652-4945. So that number again is 646-652-4945. And so we're going to start off this evening, at least for the next half hour, possibly 45 minutes or so. We'll see how long we take. But we're going to discuss what it means to follow Jesus, and specifically what following Jesus takes us into, which is part of that is a radical expression of love, which is also known as nonviolence. So, Herb, welcome to Subversive Radio.
Thank you, Keith. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's always good just to spend time with you, man.
You know what? If nothing else, even if this completely doesn't work, I'm just thrilled that I get to sit and talk with you.
Feelings very mutual.
Yeah. So, hey, man, I give you a real brief introduction there, but do you want to talk a little bit for people who maybe don't know anything about you and who you are, and can you talk a little bit about yourself and Renewed Heart Ministries? What do you do, and what's that all about?
Sure. I'm director of Renewed Heart Ministries. Renewed Heart Ministries is a teaching ministry. We are a traveling ministry. We are in a different church almost every weekend. It started... The roots of Renewed Heart Ministry started in 2007, but the roots of it go all the way back to 1998. I was teaching at a Christian college, and I got a phone call from a parent of a student that was in my classroom, and the parent said, our child has been sharing with us a little bit of what you've been teaching in the classroom. Would you be willing to come to our church for a weekend and just share with our church what you've been teaching? And so I said, sure, and didn't think any more of it. And it was in North Carolina. Traveled to North Carolina, did my weekend gig, and then went back home. And the next week, somebody called and said, hey, we were visiting that church last weekend. Would you be willing to come to our church and do that? And over the course of time, the phone just kept ringing, and it just grew and grew and grew. From 1998, all we've ever done is pick up the phone when it calls. And right now we're taking appointments for 2017. So over time we stopped teaching school and just started doing this full time. And I've worked for other ministries in the past, but this is where we're at today. We just travel around the globe and help people try to better encounter what it means to follow Jesus, and not necessarily Christianity. And we can talk about that maybe later, but specifically Jesus. What it means to follow him and to be a part of this kingdom, and what that even was that Jesus came to establish, and what it looks like to be a part of that.
Right. And you and I, well, obviously we've known each other for a while. Can you remind me and our listeners, how did you and I get connected?
Well, I became fascinated a couple of years back with the idea of in the New Testament there being no clergy laity divide, and how when the church would come together, it was focused around a meal, a shared meal, and that whenever there was any type of sharing, it was the 1 Corinthians 14 model where each person brought a hymn, a word of instruction. And today I think the label that's been attached to that is called an open meeting, where everyone is functioning more with an open participatory function rather than just passively spectating, listening to a pastor or a preacher or a clergyman or something of that nature, where most of the audience would be passive in that sense. I became fascinated with the New Testament roots with that, and I think I contacted you originally just pursuing that, how to do that, what that looks like, and you helped out significantly. And at Renewed Heart Ministries, we started a network of these what some people would call house churches, but they're just these little groups of Jesus followers who are trying to practice the one another's of the New Testament, and especially when they come together, the hope and mutual participation. So we got connected over that, I think, personally. But before that even, I had bumped into you in your blog on Pacifist Fight Club, and I'd just seen you online, and I think that's where my interest in you first peaked. And when I was working through Jesus' teachings on nonviolence, I remember reading a couple articles from you and a couple things that you had posted there on your blog, and that grew into the church stuff.
Okay. Oh, cool. Well, I think you and I also have a similar story in that this whole idea of the kingdom, the idea of following Jesus, as you said, sort of slightly in contrast to what people might think of as Christianity.
Yes.
Maybe the idea of following Jesus may be slightly different than that. And then from that into the idea of nonviolence and radical preemptive love for enemies as well as neighbors and the outcast and things like that. That's a new kind of part of our story. And I had my sort of epiphany about, I guess now it's been close to 10 years ago, but yours, how long ago was yours, and how did that take place, or can you summarize that?
Mine started around 2008, 2009. I just had a book published, my first book, called Finding the Father, and I was on the second largest Christian radio station in the nation. And just did this really, it was just an awesome radio interview, and the phone just rang off the hook, and the list, I don't know how they rate how many people out there listening, but however they did it, it showed a spike in interest during that interview, and it was all of the success of I guess that kind of ministry goal, and I don't know how to verbalize that, but what would typically be viewed upon as success for a Christian minister, there's all of this success, and I came back to my hotel room that night, and when my head hit the pillow, I was just staring up at the ceiling, having all the right answers and knowing all the right behaviors that I'd been taught, and just still feeling this gaping void right in my heart. And I remember rolling off my bed onto my knees, literally, and I just started begging God. I said, God, there is something still missing. This cannot be all it is. There's an interesting quote in one of Frank Viola's books where he says there's nothing worse than getting to the top of the ladder and realizing you were climbing the wrong ladder. And that's where I was at to a degree. In my small pond, I was approaching the top of my ladder, and it just was empty. So through a series of events that night, Jesus led me to the Sermon on the Mount. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I resonate so much with what he says. When he had been a theologian, and he bumps into the Sermon on the Mount, and it was like he was meeting Jesus for the very first time, and he'd never been a Christian until that moment. And I can sympathize with that. That resonates deeply inside of me, because I'd been doing the Christian thing forever, but I grew up. My story goes all the way back into the 80s, where I grew up with Jim and Tammy Baker and the PTL ministry and all of that in the Carolinas. And I don't know if anybody's listeners remember those days. But, the Christianity thing, I was raised to a degree in all of that. And so I'd been traditionally a Christian, but, man, I bumped into the Sermon on the Mount, and what I was encountering there, when you really try to get inside of Jesus' headspace and find out the topics that Jesus preached or taught about, the topics that Jesus was passionate about, what his agendas were, what he was trying to accomplish, I was shocked with how different Jesus was from me. And I just said, man, I want to follow that guy. What that guy's teaching, that stuff resonates with me. And there were challenges. The nonviolence thing was a significant challenge. It was a challenge for me, and it was also a challenge for a lot of the followers of Renewed Heart Ministries. We lost a lot of our following when we chose to really take seriously what Jesus taught about loving our enemy and seeking restorative justice toward our enemies rather than just retribution or punitive justice. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, man, that is so powerful, because I think my story is similar to yours in the sense that I was already, I'd been on staff at several different churches. I was the one sort of doing the teaching for everybody else, trying to explain the gospel to everybody else, and then suddenly had the realization that I didn't even really know what the gospel was, and it turned me upside down. It was just suddenly like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And it's like I felt like foolish. Yes, and then when you really, like you're saying, when you really start reading Jesus seriously, it's sort of like, if you can read the Gospels and you can read the words of Jesus and it doesn't mess you up and it doesn't challenge you and it doesn't make you uncomfortable to some degree, you're either not reading him right or there's just something wrong, because everything he was about was so radical. I mean, it's like, did he or did he not come to introduce something that was revolutionary?
That's right.
And I think most Christians, and this is the way I lived, I'm not saying this is like a pejorative to anybody, because this is where I was at as well as a Christian. Well, it's sort of like Christians sort of live as if Jesus was just, he made a lot of sense and very common sense guy, and, he was just, basically we live as if he's a good teacher, rather than living as if he's someone who turns everything upside down and challenges us to rethink everything we think we know about God and about life and everything.
Yeah, Brian Zahnd makes a great statement that he's pastor of Word of Life Church, and he made the statement a few years back that we have relegated Jesus to simply being the secretary of afterlife affairs, and he really doesn't have much to do with our present life. Derek Flood, in his book, Healing the Gospel, I remember he made a statement about Paul being not a sinner who found religion, but a deeply religious person who met Jesus. And from 2008 to 2012, my motto, I mean, what I said in almost every gathering that I was at during that time, that I was invited to speak at or to teach at, was follow Jesus, he'll ruin your life. Because that it's like he drops a bomb into all of our religiously ordered systems, and he brings chaos to our order, and it's been very desettling for me. It's been very dismantling for me.
Yeah, absolutely, but in a great way.
Absolutely. I wouldn't trade it. But,
no, absolutely
but for a
not.
person of privilege, a person who's in a position of privilege, and I'm a white male who's straight male in America who's Christian, especially in the South here. For me, what Jesus taught, it's going to ruin my world before it makes it better. And I think that's important for people to realize. The Beatitudes were written by those who were disadvantaged by the present ordering of our world. And I sit in a position of benefiting from the way the present world operates. So I'm going to have a harder time with Jesus than other people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I probably talked about this before, but I don't remember, I can't attribute this quote, so maybe if someone knows they can call in and remind me, but I just remember the quote. It's just something like, in the West, the way we preach the gospel is to tell people that if they come to Jesus, they'll get a better job, a nicer house, a better car, and a happier marriage. But everywhere else in the world, when they preach the gospel, they say, come to Jesus, and you may lose your house, lose your job, lose your car, and lose your family.
That's right.
How radically different that is. And that's, you make a good point about sort of we're in a place of privilege, and we've got a very comfort zone version, unfortunately, of the gospel. So I want to jump real quick into specifically the topic of nonviolence. So you said, I know you go and you travel and speak quite often, and you're speaking quite often to people who have maybe grown up in the church or grown up in a denomination and kind of know the party line and know how to fill in the blanks and they have all the right information, but they haven't yet encountered a Jesus who's committed to transformation. And when you talk about, I know you talk about the kingdom, and I know you talk about following Jesus in these radical ways, but when you specifically have an occasion to talk about nonviolence, what's the typical reaction that you get?
The typical reaction, whether it's positive or negative, it could be either or, is just utter shock on the part of people that Jesus actually taught nonviolence. I mean, Gandhi said the only people that think Jesus didn't teach nonviolence are the Christians. And I can attest that is absolutely true. Where I've gone around, and I'm sure other people have had different experiences, but from my religious background and my religious trajectory, where I'm coming from, the Christianity that I grew up in, this is a radically new thought to people. People had no clue that Jesus really teaches nonviolence. I just got pegged by a radical kind of conservative group just a couple weeks ago for something else I was involved with. But one of the kind of anchor points that kind of bolstered their position that I was some dangerous heretic was that, oh yes, and Herb's embraced this politically progressive and liberal position of nonviolence. And this is a conservative Christian group saying that's somehow anti-Christian, when that was fundamental to what Jesus taught his followers. It was fundamental to what Jesus demonstrated, and it's rooted in an enemy love. And I think we're cool with the idea of loving our enemies or loving others until we start defining who that enemy or that other is, and then it really it starts to hit home. Yeah. But the biggest response I've gotten has been just utter shock. This is new material for so many. It's a new discovery that somehow Jesus taught nonviolence, when for the first 300 years of Christianity, man, this was just part of the fabric of what it meant to follow Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I've encountered the same thing, obviously, when I speak about it or I blog about it. And it's always, the pushback is always from Christians. It's always Christians who are accusing me of misrepresenting Jesus, or like, as you said, this is actually mostly common. I think almost the knee-jerk reaction is to label it as a political statement, as if I have arrived at this idea of Jesus as a nonviolent Messiah who preached and lived nonviolence, as if I've arrived at that, by way of my political, my culture, or my political preferences, and I always tell people, no, it's Jesus is the one who's talked me into this. I mean, I'm just reading the words of Jesus, and that's the thing I think that's really flabbergasting to me when people respond that way. They really don't. They have an idea of Jesus, I think, that's formed more by what they're hearing from the pulpit, for what they've been hearing all their lives growing up, more so than opening the Bible and reading it for themselves.
That's right. I mean, I get people that say, where did you make this up at? Where are you getting this from? As if I'm reading into this or it's original with me, and to go back and actually show people that before Augustine and before Constantine, that this is not any new invention. This is one of the oldest elements of genuine Christianity, is nonviolence. And you're right, the atheists and the agnostics, my friends, and I don't want to label any one of those camps, because there's just as many different types of atheists and agnostics as there are different types of Christians, and I have dear friends in all of those camps. But what I find amazing is that my atheist and agnostic friends are already sold on nonviolent means of conflict resolution, And it's like they're speechless when they see Christians who claim to be following Jesus being opposed to that. On Twitter, I have a dear friend, Ryan Bell. He's running the blog A Year Without God, and regardless of what anyone's opinion is about that whole experiment with atheism for him, he's a former pastor, but he tweeted me the other day. He said, I see the haters are coming after you now, too, to be critiqued for being, or to be attacked for embracing Jesus' nonviolence is rich. And the irony for an atheist to look at Christians attacking another Christian, for a Christian just simply taking those teachings of Jesus seriously. I mean, it is. It's the Christians that we're getting the biggest kickback on this from. Those that weren't raised in this paradigm, it makes sense to them. What Jesus taught actually resonates with them as wisdom.
Right. Yeah, and you know, it's not as if Jesus, you know, has hid this message, or it's only 2 or 3 obscure little verses that are difficult to understand, and what does it mean? And it's not like one of the parables where it's like, well, what does that stand for, and what does this metaphor mean? It's like he's not speaking in parables. He's speaking very plainly and directly, over and over and over again. And you know, and I found something just this week. I was going to blog. I'll probably still blog about it, but since we're talking about it, I thought I would just bring it up. Someone in our house church group shared Isaiah 53, which is a beautiful messianic passage, you know, written hundreds of years before Jesus showed up on the scene, and it's talking all about, you know, who has believed our message, to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed, who grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him, and it just goes on and on and on. You know, surely he took up our pain, he bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions. It goes on and on and on. So it's such a beautiful, obvious messianic picture. It's a prophecy of who Jesus was going to be and what Jesus was going to do. And it's like I'd never noticed this before in my studies, but I just noticed verse 9 in Isaiah 53, prophesying, telling us who the Messiah was going to be, and it says this: he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Now we know that's Joseph of Arimathea, right? Who was rich and gave him his tomb when he was buried. And it says, and though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. And I thought, oh my gosh, part of the messianic identity of Jesus, with all that's wrapped up in Isaiah 53, all these incredibly specific, detailed things about Jesus specifically, right there in verse 9, it tells us he had done no violence. And I thought, wow, you know what? The next time I'm talking to a Christian who tells me that, well, Jesus flipped over those tables in the temple, I'm going to say, well, but you know what? But if he did violence when he did that, he wasn't the Messiah Isaiah was talking about. Because Isaiah described the Messiah who did no violence. And not only didn't do violence, but preached that we shouldn't either.
Last month I came back from New Zealand, and I spent about 14 hours on a plane ride back listening straight to just one sermon after another by N.T. Wright. And I don't know if you've ever immersed yourself in N.T. Wright for 14 hours straight, but it is quite an experience. And when he
I have not done that to myself.
When he gets to Isaiah 53, there were so many lights that went on, Keith, as far as this being originally for Israel and what Israel's role was going to be towards the nations, and how Jesus came to be that servant, the embodiment of Israel, and to take Israel's mission to its completion, to fulfill those promises and Israel's destiny, and Jesus, you know, reforming the 12 tribes surrounding through the apostles and taking on this. And what's fascinating is Isaiah 53, it's such a beautiful chapter, but in Isaiah 54 and 55 and 56 and all the way out, it's the doing of no violence towards the enemies that brings about the conversion of the other nations around Israel in Isaiah's gospel. And when you see that's how we win the enemies, is through our non-violent response of enemy love. It awakens something in our enemies that wins them away from the violence that even they are a victim to, and they become converted. But the climax of Isaiah's gospel is not Isaiah 53. It's what comes right in those chapters right after Isaiah 53, through the nonviolence of whoever this is in Isaiah 53, how that produces the conversion of the nations in the latter part of Isaiah. And it's just beautiful, and we've missed that. We've tried to strong-arm culture. We've tried to come over, use power over others and legislate, morals and righteousness in our society. And Jesus gave us a radically different way to convert the nations through nonviolent enemy love. And it's been prophesied all the way since Isaiah.
Yep. Wow, man, that is really powerful. See, now you made me want to go and now I want to go listen to all that.
Oh, man, take that nonviolence passage, because I missed the nonviolent passage. What you just shared with me, that he did no violence, that's just that's primo. But then you add to that the fruit that no violence produces. Man, what a gospel. Yeah. I mean, that's beautiful. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Right. And I think that's I think the thing that we, that I really would want followers of Jesus to get an imagination for, is that idea that there's a reason for it. In other words, Jesus isn't just some sort of peace-loving hippie, who's like, dude, guns aren't cool, man. It's not like that. Right. It's like there's something supernatural. There's a catalyst event that takes place when evil comes against someone who is embodying Christ in that moment, who then responds with the love of Christ to that person who's the aggressor. It unleashes something. It's like it really is like this catalyst event that unleashes the kingdom of God, and it's an opportunity for that person who's doing the aggression to receive the mercy and the grace and the agape love of God that they have only dreamed about and never experienced it. But if we're the ones who have experienced it, if we have experienced that transformative love and power of the love of Christ, who are we not to share it? Who are we to hold that from somebody else? In fact, that's disobedience, because we're commanded to love our enemies. That's
right. Violence is always a finite resource. There's a limit to violence, and it's only our strength to exercise it. It's limited by our ability to wield it. Love is an infinite resource. Love endures forever. Love will always outlast violence. And the beauty of what Jesus taught in his kingdom, the beauty of what this is whispering to us, is that in the end, love wins. Love's going to win over violence. Love of enemy does turn the tide. Nonviolent responses to those that are persecuting us, the absorbing of that violence, it will overcome. And it doesn't mean that all the chapters between here and then are pretty, but the last chapter, when love finally overcomes the injustice, the oppression, and the violence of this world, the last chapter is beautiful. And you've got to have some Jesus followers that are crazy enough to go for this plan with him. And so far, historically, we've failed miserably. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the chapters in between. The love does conquer in the end. We've got to start trusting in the power of love over the power of violence. Right.
The thing is that they are. I agree with you. I mean, there is not unfortunately, some very long, sustained Christian response of love way in the face of evil and violence. There are, however, are punctuated times and moments within history where individuals and groups of people at certain points in time have responded in love, and it's been fantastic. I mean, there are examples of love overcoming evil, of nonviolence overcoming hate, and we see it not only in I think probably people in America can look at, the Martin Luther King, the movement that he inspired, which again had a political motivation to it, but yet the point is still that the principle was irresistible, and of course he picked that up from Gandhi, who picked it up from Jesus.
That's right. And I get it that there hasn't been for the last 1,700 years a sustained effort like what you're explaining. But I still hold to the belief that if Christianity would have stuck with it, what we were seeing around the time of the conversion of Constantine was the dismantling even of the Roman Empire by Christianity's nonviolent approach. So, we haven't followed it all the way out, but we can still see the oak tree that's still in the acorn. We just have yet to experience it.
Right. Yeah, and then when I look at, and it seems like in the last month, the world has just lost its mind. It's there's things going on in the Ukraine and in Africa and in the Middle East, and there's just so much violence and threats of violence and war. And I look at some of these situations and I think, if the church in those places could catch a vision for what it would be like to model the love of Christ in those situations, what an opportunity. And really right now, what a missed opportunity because we're not stepping up to that.
That's right. There are other movements afoot in society that have picked up. You talked about Martin Luther King for a moment. You talked about him learning it from Gandhi, who learned it from Jesus. There are other movements afoot in our society and our culture today that have learned from Martin Luther King, and their experience of equal rights and of fairness is just it's exponential. It's happening even faster than the civil rights did for Martin Luther King and his group. And I look at this and I say, here are all these people that have learned from these methods that originated with Jesus. What would happen if Christians actually started taking those teachings seriously too? I mean, there's all of these other groups that have taken it seriously and seen the fruit of it, and yet King made the statement that the church is typically, when it's called to be the headlights, it's typically the taillights to society and culture. And what would it be like if we could actually start believing? And I know this sounds strange, but what if believers actually started believing in what Jesus taught once again? I mean, when I look at, I know there's a lot of evil happening in the world, but there's a lot of equal rights things that are happening in the world right now too, and a lot of push for justice, especially social justice. And what I find always amazing is where social justice is being the most successful, at the heart of it is this Matthew 5 nonviolence that they're using. And I find that just where Christianity isn't backing it up anymore, all of these groups that are out there are. And that to me, it's a rebuke, but it's also inspiring to say maybe there is really something to this.
Right. Yeah, and so you and I talked about before the show about possibly getting into some of those specifically, like the gay and the homosexual communities, and the way. And I haven't. I've read a little bit on the topic. By the way, I got the book you sent me. I'm in chapter 2 right now.
Fantastic.
And I think I'll just say where I'm at, and then I think maybe we can talk about it, because you may be in a different place than I am, and this is probably a great opportunity to unpack some of it. So where I'm at, and this is what I've blogged about. Where I'm at is I see the church much more concerned about being right on the issue of homosexuality. That the Christian church in America is treating this as a debate to be won, and so we pull out the scriptures and we win the debate in our own minds. We're right, and homosexuals are wrong. We say it's a sin, and you say it isn't, and we're going to prove to you that you're going to burn in hell forever for this horrible sin, and God hates this, and by inference hates you. And so we're so focused on being right, but we're not focused on the thing that Jesus commanded us to do. He didn't command us to be right. He commanded us to love. And we're failing in that because we're so focused on being right that we're not saying, well, how can we go and stand beside these human beings who Jesus loves dearly enough to die for, and recognize that they are suffering, that they are oppressed, that they, just like my enemy, and just like my neighbor, and just like me, need the love of Christ. They need to know Him. They need to, that should be our goal. And so I've just been disappointed that the church has been more interested in being right than in being Christ-like. That we've led with this idea. I use the illustration of, you would never, I would hope, and the truth is, I know Christians who would, but I would hope anyway that a Christian's first, inclination wouldn't be to just go across the street to their unsaved neighbor and knock on the door randomly and just say, hey, by the way, I noticed that I see you drinking beer a lot, and I want you to know the Bible says that drunks are not going to make it into heaven, so you're going to hell. Have a great day. Bye. Or you wouldn't go to your coworker at work and say, hey, I just want you to know, I know you're not married, and I know you kind of have different girls, on the weekends. The Bible says that fornicators are going to burn in hell, so I just want you to know that, have a great day. By the way, where's the TPS report you owe me? We wouldn't just lead with, oh, hi, by the way, I see you got a sin, and I just want you to know that sin's going to keep you from God forever. Why would we do that? Why do Christians act as if that's what we're called to do? Rather than to just, I think Jesus has called us, again, to love God and to love others. And that loving people means we have a relationship with them, we draw near to them, we have a conversation with them, we express a genuine love and concern for their well-being, and I don't know. It frustrates me that we've decided that what we need to do is point out everybody's sin, and by the way, hopefully they won't notice mine, because I don't sin the same way they do. I get a pass, kind of a thing, and so that's kind of where I stand on it. That's where. But I don't know, where are you at on this topic?
Well, I want to totally respect what you just said, and I want to give a gracious spaciousness, as Wendy Gritter would call it, and totally affirm you for at least seeing that if this is sin, we're approaching it incorrectly. I think that's a beautiful place to start. Historically, Christianity, especially in the West, has viewed anything non-normative, anything different than the majority, as always being sinful, always being dangerous. And I want to affirm what you said for this reason. If we would put down viewing one small act, and to be honest, or put down our opinion about one small act. To be honest, people are gay. Whether that's right or wrong, that doesn't solve anything. They are gay. They have an orientation, and even among my Christian, gay, lesbian, transgender, intersex, queer friends, there's as much debate among them as whether it's okay for same-sex to take place, same-sex sex to take place or not, whether a person's sex has any or gender's not the right word, but whether they're male or female, there's much debate among them as there is among heterosexuals, Christians who are arguing over this. So I think we need to see that. But this is where I want to affirm what you're saying, is that what I think is going to happen, and I can only speak from my own story, my own experience, is that when we put down what we believe about one small act, and we set that aside and we focus on actually loving the other, the person that we view as non-like us, someone that's different, when we focus on loving them as someone Jesus died for, someone that Jesus would say, this kingdom that I've come to establish, if you're being oppressed for whatever reason, this kingdom is for you, then what that creates in our heart is a pause that is long enough to hear their voice, to hear their stories. And what I think we would find out is that this group has been so mischaracterized and so labeled and misdefined that we'll find out that gay people, lesbians, bisexuals, transgenders, they are nothing like what we thought, And we're going to learn a lot more from their story. And there was a time where learning to see the humanity, and I don't want to compare slavery to the LGBTQ community. I know there's difference, but there is some similarity there that when Christians began to see the humanity of the African American slaves, their biblical exegesis on slavery radically changed.
Right.
And I think that's where we have to start. We have to start seeing lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders. We've got to stop calling them sinner. We don't do that to any other human being.
No, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Exactly. We've got to start seeing them as someone Jesus died for, just like us. And we're not inviting them to the table because we don't have any more right to the table than they do. We're welcoming them to come to the table with us. We're not there kind of as an usher saying, yes, you can have a place here too. It's that they have a place here right alongside of us as equals. And when we start seeing them in that light, and then when we stop and hear their stories, I think the stories, Tony Campolo, and I don't agree with everything Tony says on this issue or this subject, but Tony Campolo, I love what he said. He said that what's really missing is relationships. Is that if we would actually enter into a relationship with those that we have labeled as queer or gay or bisexual or lesbian or whatever the label is, when we start entering into a relationship and we see the humanity of another individual and we hear their stories, that affects now when we go back to the scriptures. That has happened over and over and over again. And it's typically a pastor who has a child that comes out of the closet, and they know this child, and this child doesn't match anything like what they have seen in the scriptures, and it causes them to go back. James Brownson is the author of the book that I sent you, and that was his story. He had to go back, and he's an astute scholar, and his book, Bible, Gender, and Sexuality, I can't recommend highly enough. I think it's a work that you're going to have some serious contention to come up against it. I mean, it's a serious exegetical work, but his exegesis, which I think is solid, came out of this experience he had with his son. And over and over again, that's a story. The moment we see these individuals as people, it's going to affect how we read the scriptures. And I think that's how it's supposed to. Love is supposed to be what leads the day. And if there is a sin to be won from or restored from or redeemed from, love's going to take care of that too. You don't have to worry about that. But what may happen is we might get a broader understanding of what sin is for both a heterosexual and a homosexual, and our ideas could get revolutionized in the process. It may not be them that ends up changing as much as it is us. And I don't want to say it to one or the other, because I think both will change to some degree. I'm not talking about reorientation and all of that change.
Sure.
But we all become more Christ-like in whatever orientation we have. And I think there's a lot that's rooted in just listening to their stories, just seeing them as human being and valuing them as a human being, as someone that Jesus died for too, someone who has a place set at the table beside them too. We might get changed more than they do is what I'm trying to say.
I think we will. And, thank you so much. That was excellent. And I think you have made an amazing, such a profound point, because I've seen it over and over again. When it's easy to talk about, the homosexuals until, like you said, someone that you dearly love as a friend, you realize they're homosexual. Or it's easy to say those Muslims as if every one of them is a American-hating murderer, terrorist, until you meet one and he comes to your house and he's just the most wonderful person. We've had a lot of Muslim students who live who are here and studying here, coming to college here in Orange County, who visited our house church, and you realize, oh my gosh, they're people just like us. Well, when it's easy to talk about the poor, the people live in poverty, until you meet them and you realize, oh my gosh, these are just dear people. And by putting a face and a name.
That's right. And I know we're almost out of time. I want to make sure I get this out too. I'm not comfortable with saying it's like getting to know a drunk or a murderer or a drug addict. I'm much more comfortable saying it's like getting to know a black or getting to know a person that's left-handed for the first time. Or like you just said, it's like getting to know a Muslim for the first time. It's just someone that's different from us. And we need to start there. We have to get to know them before we label the difference that's between us as right or wrong. And we've kind of got the cart before the horse there. We have to find out whether being black is a sin, whether being a Muslim is a sin, being left-handed is a sin. We've got to start there first. We've got to get to know them.
Yep. So I don't know if we're going to get cut off here. My timer is telling me I got like 2 seconds. So it may give me the option to keep going, and if it does, we can keep going a little bit. If not, then thank you for being on the show, Herb. And
thank you so much for having me, Keith. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. This was great, and I was very blessed. And let's see if you have a chance coming up, let's do it again.
All right, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Herb. God bless you, man.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. So I don't know. It looks like I may still be going. I'm not sure how much time I have left or if it's going to cut me off here. But if you've been listening, thank you for listening. Tomorrow night, my guest will be Steve Gregg. We will have a different time. We'll meet at our show will start at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's late for most of you on the East Coast, of course. But then we will also have a show on Thursday night, which is, and that'll also be at 6 p.m. I want to thank you all for listening. Again, thanks to my guest, Herb Montgomery, and hopefully we can continue this conversation in the future. If you have any suggestions or ideas or comments, please leave them on the blog or on the comments here, or you can comment on Twitter or Facebook. Thank you for listening. God bless, and let the kingdom come.